Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are looking at, well, maybe the most consequential digital power struggle happening right now. Forget just, small updates to the apps you use. We're witnessing this real high-stakes two-horse race to build the ultimate digital platform, the everything app, as people are calling it. And this isn't just about search anymore or social media or even AI by itself. It's about a single interface, potentially, that manages your attention, your productivity, how you create things, and yeah, your money too. It's really about who controls your entire digital life. How you use technology every single day could be completely redefined.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is that the two main players are aiming for the same end goal, this sort of total digital control, but they're starting from completely opposite ends of the spectrum. You've got OpenAI on one side, right, with ChatGPT. That's the assistant-first approach. They're trying to grow out from just answering questions and being an interface into actual commerce, into having a whole developer ecosystem built around it. And then on the other side, you've got xAI's Grok, which is, super tightly integrated with the X platform. That's the network-first play. They're trying to add sophisticated AI, these autonomous agents we hear about, and crucially, transactions onto this huge social network that already exists.
Right. So it's the platform strategy versus the super app strategy. And it feels like things are really converging right now. So our mission for you, the listener, today is pretty clear. We're going to unpack the 5 essential pillars that really define what an everything app even is. And we'll look at why pulling all these pillars together has been, well, basically impossible in the West until now. Then we'll dive deep into the unique strategic advantages, but also the critical challenges. For both OpenAI and xAI, we've got some great source material guiding us on their next moves. And finally, maybe most importantly, we'll go through 5 very specific scenarios that could realistically play out over, say, the next 12 to 24 months. We're basically giving you a scorecard here so you can track who's pulling ahead in this really monumental race. It's about knowing exactly what signals to watch for in the news. Okay, let's unpack this. So this term everything app, it gets thrown around a lot, doesn't it? Usually people point to WeChat in China, Tencent's app, which is completely dominates people's digital lives there. But in the West, I mean, our markets are so fragmented, right?
You've got device makers, regulators, tons of specialized apps. So what's the actual framework here? What really defines this ultimate platform we're talking about?
Yeah, that fragmentation you mentioned, that's actually the key point. The sources we looked at really emphasize that no single app in the West has managed to combine all 5 of the required pillars at, true scale. Not yet, anyway. And that's why this race is so interesting. It's not just about building another app. It's about trying to create a whole new category of app. WeChat really sets the precedent because it did it. It successfully bundled all 5 of these core digital interactions into one single, incredibly powerful interface. If you don't control all 5, I mean, you just can't really claim that title of everything app.
Okay, so let's define the territory then. What are these 5 pillars? What's the foundation that gets users coming back every single day?
Right. So we start with pillar number 1, attention. This is the daily hook, isn't it? It's that zero-sum game for screen time. It covers the basics like search, obviously, social feeds, direct chat, and also voice interaction. It's just not enough to be useful sometimes. You have to be the thing people open by default, whether they're looking something up, posting a quick thought, or even just, scrolling for 5 minutes while waiting in line.
Okay, so attention gets the eyeballs.
Yeah.
But pillar number 2, this sounds like where things get complicated, both financially and with regulators.
Oh, absolutely. Pillar 2 is utility. This is the transactional layer. And honestly, this is where most Western apps just haven't managed to cross the finish line. Utility means having native capabilities for things like payments, shopping, booking travel or appointments, and really crucially, managing your identity securely. If you can't transact seamlessly within the app, I mean, if I have to jump out to another app or website to finish booking a hotel or pull out my credit card or securely prove who I am, then you're just a useful tool. You're not a super app. This is probably the single hardest pillar to nail in the fragmented U.S. regulatory landscape.
Why is that? Why is utility, particularly the payments and identity piece, such a bottleneck here compared to, say, Asia?
Well, it really boils down to regulatory hurdles. Things like KYC, Know Your Customer, and AML, which is anti-money laundering compliance. In China, for example, regulatory compliance tends to be much more centralized. Getting approvals can be streamlined. But in the U.S., oh man, every single state has its own specific rules and licensing requirements for money transmitters. Remember when X announced their plans for X Money? Our sources indicate they had to start applying for over 40 separate state-by-state licenses. Just imagine the legal teams, the compliance overhead. It takes massive resources and it dramatically slows down deployment. That's a huge reason why we haven't seen a true WeChat-level payment system take hold here yet.
That context is really vital. Okay, moving on then. Pillar number 3 deals with what users actually do on these platforms, the content side.
Exactly. Pillar 3 is creation. And honestly, with generative AI blowing up, this is basically table stakes now. It's about enabling users to produce and manage all sorts of content. That could be simple stuff like social posts or more complex things like documents, maybe even writing functional code. And increasingly, it includes advanced multimedia content, think high-fidelity video, which, by the way, is a massive compute focus for both OpenAI and XAI right now, especially given OpenAI's big push with their SOAR model.
Okay, creation. Now, the fourth pillar sounds like the really futuristic one, the one that truly leverages these powerful AI models they've built. What's that?
Pillar 4 is autonomy. And yeah, this is the critical layer, the one that feels most like science fiction becoming reality. This is all about agents, AI agents that can act on your behalf across different services without needing constant human handholding. We're talking about a shift from an assistant that just answers your questions to an agent that actually executes complex, multi-step tasks for you. Like, imagine it managing your calendar, maybe negotiating a change to your flight booking automatically, or even buying the products it recommends to you, all based on what they call long horizon reasoning. The AI has to understand a complex goal and work towards it over time.
Wow, okay. Autonomy. And finally, pillar 5. No platform can survive in a vacuum, right? It needs others involved.
That's exactly right. The fifth and final pillar is the ecosystem. This means the platform needs to be able to host third-party apps or maybe mini programs that add specialized functions and enhance the overall utility. But here's the crucial part. The platform must provide clear ways for these third-party developers to get their apps discovered, real distribution, and also robust, fair ways for them to actually make money, monetization. If you can convince hundreds, maybe thousands of developers to build cool, specialized services on top of your platform, you create this incredible moat. You get longevity, way more diverse utility than you could ever build yourself, and really deep customer lock-in.
That's a fantastic breakdown. So these 5 pillars, just to recap: attention, utility, creation, autonomy, and ecosystem. They really map out what these future services are fighting for. It's not just your attention anymore, it's your wallet, your identity, even your most complex workflows. It's truly comprehensive digital control. Okay, so we've got the battle map defined by those 5 pillars. Now let's look at how OpenAI and XAI are actually trying to capture that territory. Because, as you said, they're coming from such wildly different starting points. Let's kick off with OpenAI. Their whole strategy seems to hinge on tuning an interface, basically a chat box, into a kind of operating system.
Yeah, that's spot on. OpenAI's core identity, their strategic DNA, is really about transforming ChatGPT from just a conversational assistant into a full-blown operating system, but one that's built on, their perceived advantage and reasoning capabilities. Their whole strategy is assistant first. The idea is win the mindshare, own the primary interface people use, and then backfill the other pieces you need for platform dominance, namely the commerce side and that crucial developer ecosystem.
And their first big move in that direction seemed like a direct challenge to the existing king of attention, which is traditional search, right? Google search.
Absolutely correct. That broad rollout of ChatGPT search, that was a really significant moment. It fundamentally tries to change the user experience of looking things up. Instead of getting, the classic 10 blue links on a Google page, the idea is you get one timely synthesized answer, ideally backed by sources, and combined with the advanced reasoning of the language model itself. They're not really trying to compete head-on with Google's indexing of the entire web. They're competing on comprehension and synthesis, trying to shorten that distance between asking a question and getting a useful, actionable answer.
And that shift from being just a useful tool to really trying to become a platform, that seemed to crystallize at their big developer event, Dev Day 2025. That's where the ecosystem pillar really started getting built out, wasn't it?
Exactly. That Dev Day was pivotal. OpenAI launched 2 key things: apps inside ChatGPT, and maybe even more importantly, the associated Apps SDK, the software development kit. This SDK is the absolute foundation of their ecosystem strategy. It gives developers the tools to build and ship these specialized, persistent mini-apps that actually run directly inside the chat window. They can leverage ChatGPT's reasoning model, kind of like it's the host OS, and the SDK itself is the incentive structure, right? It promises developers relatively easy distribution access to ChatGPT's millions of users and straightforward integration points, potentially without all the heavy lifting and costs associated with maintaining a standalone app in the traditional app stores.
So they're basically pitching developers on the idea that the chat interface is the next big app store. But, I mean, for any operating system, being everywhere is key, right? Ubiquity. The sources we looked at hinted they might be thinking beyond just web browsers and phone apps.
Yes, that's a critical point. If they truly want this assistant as OS vision to work, the platform can't just live inside a browser tab or a mobile app, especially if they want that low latency autonomy we talked about. There's reporting around Dev Day 2025 suggesting that OpenAI is actively exploring hardware options. Now, whether that means their own proprietary devices or maybe deep partnerships with existing hardware makers, ODMs, we don't know for sure. But the goal would be to cement this assistant as interface vision. Imagine like a dedicated device or maybe earbuds that give you instantaneous, low latency voice interaction with ChatGPT's agents, making them ambient, always available across all your devices. It's kind of like the original vision for Amazon's Alexa, but potentially backed by vastly more powerful reasoning capabilities.
Okay, so summing up OpenAI's position. Their advantages seem to be a really popular, sticky assistant-first user experience, a developer platform that's growing fast thanks to the Apps SDK, and this ability to combine search and reasoning in one conversational flow. But let's play devil's advocate for a second. If utility, especially payments, is their big weak spot, why haven't they just gone out and bought a payment company? Wouldn't that solve the problem?
Hmm. Ah, that's the core strategic question, isn't it? And it points directly to one of their biggest vulnerabilities right now. Their challenge lies squarely in that utility pillar. Commerce and payments are just immature for them. They're incredibly strong on answering questions and generating content, but they struggle when it comes to acting in the real world and, crucially, transacting. Now, could they make a major acquisition? Sure. But if they bought a payment processor or a fintech company, they'd immediately inherit this immense legal and regulatory complexity that comes with running a financial service. And historically, OpenAI has seemed quite keen to avoid that kind of operational burden. So, for now at least, it looks like their strategy is to enable purchases via partnerships, integrating with existing payment providers rather than building their own native payment rails. But that creates friction, right? If a user has to leave ChatGPT, go to another site, input their credit card details, use a separate checkout process, well, that vision of a seamless OS starts to break down. It becomes a critical failure point. Plus, we can't ignore the content safety issues. Things like the backlash they faced over their video model, Sora concerns about deepfakes, copyright, misuse. These kinds of controversies significantly increase their governance load, and maintaining trust with users, with businesses, with regulators is absolutely critical, especially as these AI agents become more autonomous and capable of real-world actions.
Okay, fascinating. Now let's flip the coin and look at the other major contender, XAI and the X platform. As you said, this is a complete inversion of OpenAI's strategy. They're starting with this massive established network, this huge distribution channel with millions of daily users, and they're trying to build the utility and autonomy layers into it.
Precisely. Their core identity is anchored by that existing social graph on X, the constant real-time data flow, and just the sheer scale of daily distribution they already have. Their strategy relies on leveraging the habits people already have, scrolling the timeline, watching videos, sending DMs, and then grafting the necessary utility layers onto that. The main focus seems to be making commerce feel native to the social experience itself. Honestly, it's probably the closest thing we have in the West right now to a blueprint for realizing that WeChat-style, all-encompassing super app potential.
So how does Grok, the AI engine from XAI, fit into this? How does it elevate X beyond just being a social network with some extra features?
Grok is positioned as the engine for autonomy within the X ecosystem. The sources we reviewed indicated that the introduction of Grok 3 and its variants really emphasized capabilities like long-horizon reasoning, that ability to handle complex multi-step tasks, and crucially, real-time knowledge integration. Because Grok has access to that fire hose of real-time conversation, breaking news, and trending topics happening on the X platform, the argument is that it can execute actions with the level of relevant, up-to-the-minute context that an AI model operating in a more insulated environment, no matter how smart it is, might miss. This agentic push directly aligns with that do things for me aspect of the utility pillar. The idea is to allow Grok to perform complex actions, maybe initiated by something happening on the platform, using the context provided by the network itself.
But again, the foundation, the absolute bedrock of the super app concept is that transactional layer, which brings us right back to those regulatory headaches and the big bet on X money.
Yes, and this is arguably the single most critical piece of their strategy. It's high effort, definitely high risk, but also potentially high reward. X signaled really serious plans back in 2025 for rolling out peer-to-peer, P2P payments. And they started taking those crucial, very complex, and notoriously slow steps of obtaining those money transmitter licenses, state by painful state, over 40 of them, as we mentioned. This is literally the definition of building the necessary regulatory scaffolding if you want to create a Western version of WeChat's payment system. They've also apparently teased features like debit cards, which suggest they're thinking beyond just simple in-app wallets and aiming for true financial utility that connects to the broader financial system. Make no mistake, without these native payment rails working smoothly and reliably, X remains fundamentally a social platform with some commerce features bolted on. With them, if they can pull it off, they start to look much more like a financial institution integrated with a social network.
And while X is battling through all that compliance complexity on the consumer side, they seem to have found a rather clever way to jumpstart their presence in the enterprise market, didn't they?
They did, absolutely. This is a really interesting strategic countermove to OpenAI's early dominance through partnerships, especially with Microsoft Azure. Microsoft started hosting Grok models within its Azure AI Foundry. This move basically grants XAI immediate credibility and a pathway into mainstream enterprise IT stacks. They're leveraging a partnership structure that looks very similar to the successful Azure OpenAI model. For large companies that prioritize things like data security, compliance, and existing vendor relationships, being able to access Grok through Azure potentially bypasses years of complex procurement processes and infrastructure integration hurdles they might face trying to deal with XAI directly.
Okay, so XAI's advantages are pretty clear. That built-in social graph is huge. They have massive existing distribution through X, and they have this integrated vision for payments with actual regulatory progress being made. But what's the biggest internal challenge? What's the thing that could potentially derail this whole super app ambition for them?
I think their core challenge really boils down to consistency and trust. It's twofold, really. First, while the payments vision is integrated and ambitious, its actual rollout is heavily dependent on getting those regulatory approvals, which leads to those complicated and often unpredictable timelines we just discussed. A delay in a key state like New York or California could significantly hamper momentum. But perhaps more critically, they continue to suffer from these persistent headwinds around brand safety and content moderation incidents on the X platform itself. Sources like People.com and others repeatedly highlight these issues. These incidents, these content shocks, they risk deterring mainstream users. They definitely frustrate key advertisers whose spending they need, and they could potentially scare off the very commerce partners and payment processors they need to make X money truly successful. I mean, think about it. When you're asking people and businesses to trust your platform with their actual money, perceived stability, reliability, and consistent policy enforcement become absolutely paramount. Any whiff of chaos or unpredictability is a major deterrent. Okay, so we've laid out the strategic foundations for both players. Now let's move beyond just looking at what they have built and really dissect how they're positioned to win across those 5 major competitive levers we identified earlier. This is where we can really start to contrast their core strengths and, maybe more importantly, their weaknesses.
All right, let's get into the head-to-head. Let's start where the battle really begins every single day: distribution and daily habit. Who has the stickier product, the stronger pull for users?
Well, for OpenAI, their whole game relies on creating a new habit centered around utility. They need people to start thinking of ChatGPT first, instead of Google for search, instead of their specialized travel app for booking flights, instead of their existing productivity suite for writing documents. The success, that compounding effect they need, really hinges on whether those third-party apps built with their SDK can actually attract and keep users engaged inside the ChatGPT interface. If the user still defaults back to Google for a quick factual search, or they still open the Expedia app to book a hotel because it feels more reliable or familiar, then that daily habit loop fails to form for OpenAI.
And X, on the other hand, they're kind of relying on brute force, aren't they?
Yeah.
Just leveraging the existing scrolling behavior that millions already have?
Exactly. XAI and X are banking on existing, deeply ingrained behaviors. People scrolling the timeline, watching videos, communicating via DMs. It's already a daily habit for a huge number of users. Their execution challenge is different. It's about skillfully grafting those payment and utility layers onto these existing social loops without disrupting the core experience too much. If they can make it seamless, if a popular creator can easily sell merchandise directly in their feed, or if you can instantly send money to a friend right within a DM using X Money, then the existing habit gets secured and monetized almost simultaneously. That's a powerful combination if they can pull it off.
Okay, next up, let's talk about what feels like the truly decisive factor, the one that really separates a potential super app from just a useful tool: commerce and payments.
Yeah.
You said earlier, here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, this is arguably OpenAI's Achilles heel right now. As we discussed, they are currently completely partner dependent for payments. This means they have to aggregate checkouts somehow, likely through those app integrations they're building. But they fundamentally lack their own native payment rails. They can't process funds themselves, they can't manage complex peer-to-peer flows, they can't easily handle merchant payouts or disputes. In essence, they're acting more like a broker, connecting users to external payment systems rather than being the bank themselves.
But hold on, if they're so reliant on partners, couldn't they try to solve this or at least mitigate it by
Mhm.
forming a really deep, maybe even exclusive partnership, say with a major player like Stripe or PayPal? Couldn't they integrate their APIs super tightly into ChatGPT?
Oh, they absolutely could, and that's definitely a strategic option for them. It might even be their most likely path in the near term. And yes, a deep partnership like that could pose a significant threat to X's ambitions. However, even with an exclusive partnership, they're still fundamentally reliant on that external partner's technology, their compliance infrastructure, their fee structure, their risk models. It's still a dependency, albeit perhaps a more tightly integrated one. X, on the other hand, is going through the pain of building its own native rails with X money. If they succeed, they control the entire transactional layer. That gives them potentially much greater control over things like merchant fees, fraud detection, the user experience of paying things that are vital if you want to build a truly successful commerce pillar. But as we keep coming back to, this path for X is fraught with peril. It faces those staggered regulatory approvals state by state and intense policy scrutiny from lawmakers and consumer groups, as sources like SwipeSum, which tracks this stuff closely, consistently highlight.
Okay, so the big risk for X is the regulatory gauntlet slowing them down indefinitely. And the big risk for OpenAI is this ongoing transactional dependence, making them less integrated and potentially less profitable on transactions. Let's shift gears to agents that act, autonomy. We talked about this being the futuristic pillar. How do their AI capabilities stack up when it comes to actually getting things done, especially complex, long-horizon tasks?
For OpenAI, the path here seems primarily technical. They have the Apps SDK, they have their search capabilities, which together already enable some pretty sophisticated multi-step reasoning, at least in theory. The next critical step for them is ensuring they have stable, reliable, production-ready APIs that allow their agents to actually take action in the real world, booking flights, buying products, sending emails, and do it securely and in a way that's auditable. They really need to prove that their agents can be trusted to safely manage sensitive user credentials and interact reliably across multiple third-party services without messing things up. That's a huge technical and safety challenge.
And X, with Grok, is trying to leverage that real-time network context to make its agents smarter or more relevant.
Yes, that seems to be the angle. Grok is marketed as having these advanced reasoning agents. The unique selling proposition is that the massive real-time X social graph provides unique context that other models lack. For example, imagine Grok spotting chatter about a flight delay affecting your route, cross-referencing it with your likely location based on your activity, and proactively suggesting or even initiating a rebooking. That kind of real-time social context could be a differentiator. And don't forget the Azure hosting component we mentioned earlier. That's key here too, because it potentially facilitates the immediate application of these Grok reasoning agents to high-value enterprise use cases, things like analyzing supply chain disruptions in real time or doing sophisticated corporate financial analysis based on market chatter.
Okay, moving to the less visible but absolute critical battleground, infrastructure and partnerships. Building and running these massive AI models and platforms requires unbelievable amounts of compute power and strategic alliances.
Right. And here, OpenAI is signaling enormous capital expenditure. They're being very aggressive about expanding their compute capacity, both through partnerships with hyperscalers like Microsoft, but also exploring specialized AI chip partnerships beyond just NVIDIA. The sources we've seen indicate they are making massive ongoing bets on scaling up their agentic apps and especially their video generation capabilities, like Sora. Both of those require just exponential increases in processing power compared to simple text generation. They seem to be betting that if they can win on the autonomy and creation fronts, they absolutely must have the underlying infrastructure ready to scale instantly to meet potentially enormous demand.
Whereas XAIX, mainly through that Azure deal, seems to have found a way to bypass some of that upfront capital investment, at least for the enterprise side.
Precisely. That Azure partnership is a major infrastructure shortcut for XAI, particularly for cracking the enterprise market. It gives them immediate access to Azure's global footprint, its compliance certifications, and its existing relationships with large corporations. This potentially allows xAI to focus more of its own internal compute resources and engineering talent on training the core Grok models and maintaining the massive X consumer platform, while leveraging Microsoft's established trust and infrastructure to generate B2B revenue streams more quickly.
Okay, finally, let's contrast the thorny issue of governance and safety, which we're calling the trust factor. They seem to face entirely different kinds of threats to user and partner trust, don't they?
They really do. For OpenAI, as they build out their app ecosystem, they increasingly need to professionalize their governance model. They essentially need to build something that looks and functions like an App Store review system, similar to what Apple and Google have, but adapted for AI-powered mini-apps running inside ChatGPT. They need processes to vet these third-party apps for safety, security, and quality. They need to manage the integrations with payment providers carefully. And furthermore, as we saw with the backlash over Sora, they have an urgent need to implement things like mandatory watermarking on AI-generated media and develop robust protocols for managing intellectual property rights. This is all crucial for maintaining public trust and corporate confidence, especially as their models get more powerful at creating potentially deceptive content. Their governance challenge is heavily centered on data integrity, IP rights, and the responsible deployment of generative AI.
Whereas for XAI and X, the trust issues seem more rooted in the, let's say, sometimes chaotic nature of the social platform itself and the added risks of handling actual money.
That's exactly the distinction. XAI and X absolutely must find a way to stabilize their content moderation policies and improve brand safety outcomes on the X platform. As we've discussed, those chronic incidents, the content shocks, they directly risk undermining the confidence of payment providers, advertisers, and major commerce partners, all of whom are essential if X money is going to succeed at scale. For them, stability and predictability in leadership and policy enforcement are basically non-negotiable if they want to achieve mainstream financial adoption. Their governance challenge centers much more on financial fraud prevention, getting KY-TRAM right for X money is critical, and mitigating the content risks inherent in a massive, often unruly, real-time social platform. They desperately need reliability to attract and retain high-value commerce partners and users' financial trust.
Okay, we've broken down the players, their strategies, their strengths, their weaknesses, and the battleground. Now let's look forward. We've mapped out 5 potential future outcomes based on the sources and analysis. Think of this as a roadmap for you, the listener, highlighting exactly what triggers and signals you should be tracking over the next, say, 1 to 2 years.
All right, scenario A. We're giving this one the highest probability, around 40%, mainly because it leverages OpenAI's significant existing advantages in AI reasoning and interface design. The story here is basically that ChatGPT evolves beyond just answering questions. It actually becomes the undisputed default interface for a huge range of daily tasks, effectively displacing Google search for many intent-driven actions things where you want to do something, not just find information. In this scenario, that apps ecosystem we talked about really takes off. It explodes into this vibrant economy of mini programs for all sorts of things: complex shopping comparisons, booking travel with specific preferences, specialized productivity tools, all running seamlessly right inside the chat interface.
And to really cement that OS status, they need to break free from just being a website or a mobile app, right? They need to be everywhere.
Absolutely. This scenario really solidifies if OpenAI achieves that kind of ambient voice presence and true cross-device ubiquity we discussed. That would likely happen either through a rumored proprietary hardware companion, maybe smart glasses or an AI pin, or through deep integration deals with major OEMs, getting ChatGPT built into cars, home assistants, maybe even other operating systems. If they achieve that, interaction becomes instantaneous. You wouldn't even need to consciously open an app anymore. The assistant is just there.
So if this scenario is playing out, what should listeners be watching for? What are the key indicators?
Okay. Keep a close eye on the growth metrics for their app ecosystem. Specifically, look for reports on monthly active app installs within ChatGPT. More importantly, track the depth of merchant integrations. Are we seeing official buy with ChatGPT or book with ChatGPT pilot programs that go beyond just providing links and actually handle the checkout process within the interface? That's a huge signal. And of course, any official announcement of hardware, either their own device or a major partnership with a car maker or device manufacturer, would be a massive trigger confirming this trajectory.
Makes sense. And what's the primary risk that could derail this scenario for OpenAI?
I see two main risks. First, as they become more platform-like, potentially controlling access to users for third-party services, they could attract significant antitrust scrutiny from regulators, similar to what Apple and Google face with their app stores. Second, and perhaps more immediate, is that ongoing payment dependence we keep highlighting. If they can't find a truly seamless way to handle transactions natively or through a super tight partnership, it will continue to slow down their ability to monetize the platform effectively and will limit the complexity of the commerce and utility functions they can realistically support. All right, scenario B. We're putting this at about 25% probability. This outcome is really a testament to the potential power of vertical integration combining social, content, and payments. But its success is heavily dependent on navigating that regulatory maze and achieving stable, reliable execution. The story here is that X Money manages to successfully secure those critical, high-impact money transmitter licenses, especially in the big, complex states like New York and California. Getting those approvals would allow them to finally launch robust peer-to-peer, P2P payments and merchant services at a significant scale across the U.S.
So this scenario is really about X succeeding in building that self-contained commercial ecosystem right inside the platform.
Exactly. Commerce wouldn't just be an add-on, it would be woven deeply into the fabric of the platform. You'd see it integrated seamlessly through things like creator revenue sharing programs, where creators can easily sell products or subscriptions to their followers. You'd see in-stream shops embedded directly in the timeline, and you'd likely see Grok playing a role powering real-time shopping recommendations, or maybe even facilitating transactions based on conversations happening on the platform. If they can successfully combine that massive social graph with smooth native payments, they could create this incredibly powerful, self-contained commerce loop. It keeps users engaged, drives massive transaction volume, and generates significant revenue.
Okay, given the huge regulatory hurdles here, the triggers to watch must be very focused on finance and licensing, right? And what's the key performance indicator, KPI, that would tell us if this is actually working?
Indeed. You absolutely need to track the status of those licensing approvals. News releases about getting the green light in major states like NY or CA would be huge milestones. Also, watch for the actual launch and, crucially, the reliability and user uptake of their merchant tools and any consumer-facing financial products like that rumored debit card. But the single most important KPI to track here is GMV, gross merchandise volume. That's the total dollar value of all goods and services sold through the platform over a given period. If X successfully integrates payments and commerce, we should see their platform GMV start to surge significantly. That would be the clearest sign that the strategy is gaining traction.
And the primary risk here remains essentially the same as their core challenge, doesn't it? Volatility and regulation?
Precisely. Regulatory roadblocks are a constant threat. A key state could deny or indefinitely delay a license application, seriously crippling the rollout. And as we've discussed, those recurring brand safety incidents or major content moderation controversies continue to pose a risk. They can slow down user adoption, scare away crucial advertisers, and potentially deter high-profile payment processors or commerce partners from fully committing to the platform. Sources like Social Media Today frequently report on these kinds of headwinds. They desperately need a period of sustained stability to overcome the lingering trust deficit, especially if they want people to use X for serious financial transactions. Okay, scenario C, we're giving this about a 20% chance. This is the outcome where neither player achieves total dominance, and instead we see a split market where their respective strengths prove to be somewhat complementary. The story here is that the market bifurcates. ChatGPT comes to dominate the world of sophisticated AI agents, complex reasoning tasks, maybe enterprise workflows, and general knowledge queries. Meanwhile, X successfully leverages its network effect to dominate real-time information, social interaction, and, crucially, it manages to build out those native payment rails for consumer transactions.
So in this world, they don't necessarily crush each other, but they find ways to integrate where it makes sense for the user.
Exactly. Integration becomes key, rather than outright domination. They might integrate with each other where necessary to provide a more seamless user experience. For example, you might see Grok models running on Azure being used for certain enterprise tasks, while consumer-facing applications built using OpenAI's tools might end up plugging into X's emerging commerce APIs to actually complete a purchase transaction initiated by ChatGPT. So the user journey might start with the OpenAI assistant helping you research and decide on a product, but the final click to buy might actually use the X Money API for the payment processing.
Interesting. So the key indicator here isn't really about market share dominance, but more about interoperability and maybe the health of the developer platforms.
Right. You'd want to track metrics like overlapping monthly active users, MAUs. How many people are regularly using both systems? That would suggest coexistence. And maybe even more importantly, watch for cross-integration announcements. Are the companies making their APIs available to each other? Are they forming partnerships? Also, look at the developer ecosystem. Is it becoming fluid? Can third-party developers easily build apps using, say, the ChatGPT SDK, but then also integrate those apps or port them over to work within the X interface or other platforms? If the tools and platforms become more compatible, that strengthens the case for long-term coexistence. Now, for scenario D, which we see as less likely, maybe around 10% probability, this is essentially the scenario where external forces, specifically regulators, prevent the everything app vision from fully materializing for either player. The story here is that the market fractures, not because of competition between the companies, but because AI safety regulations, data privacy rules, and especially payment regulations become too burdensome, too fragmented across different jurisdictions, or maybe even contradictory.
So in this future, the grand ambition of a single app managing everything just kind of fizzles out. They're forced to pull back and focus on more specialized, less integrated applications.
Precisely. Those really ambitious everything app features, particularly the ones related to deep autonomy, agents acting on your behalf, and seamless utility, integrated payments, and identity, end up being too difficult or risky to deploy broadly. They might only get shipped in very limited, highly secured, maybe geographically restricted pieces, which ultimately stalls widespread consumer adoption. The dream doesn't die completely, but it gets significantly watered down and delayed. The triggers to watch for here would be major enforcement actions from regulators. Think about crackdowns related to AI-generated content, maybe strict mandates on bias correction, deepfake detection, or data provenance for training models. Or, on the financial side, much stricter enforcement or new regulations around payments laws like KYCAML, potentially making it too costly or complex for platforms like Xmoney to operate at scale for consumers. If the regulatory burden starts to clearly outweigh the potential benefits of integration, you could see companies pulling back on these ambitious features. Finally, we have scenario E, which we consider the real dark horse, maybe only 5% probability, but definitely worth considering. This is the scenario where the incumbent giants, the operating system, Titans, Apple, and Google, manage to leverage their fundamental control over the hardware and the core software interface.
Right, so the story here is that Apple and Google bake agentic AI capabilities so deeply into iOS and Android themselves that they essentially suffocate these aspiring foreground super apps like ChatGPT and X before they can truly take hold.
Exactly. You have to remember, Apple and Google own the metal. They control the low latency processing on the device, the core data pipelines, the APIs that apps rely on. So if they decide to launch their own powerful OS-level agent frameworks, let's just call them system agents, for now they could potentially restrict the deep system access, the background processing permissions, and the data flows that the more sophisticated long-horizon agents being built by OpenAI or XAI would likely need to function effectively. In this scenario, ChatGPT and Grok don't disappear, but they get relegated. They become high-quality model providers that plug into these native system assistants rather than being the central operating interface themselves. They become components within the Apple or Google ecosystem, not the ecosystem itself.
That's a sobering thought for OpenAI and XAI. What would be the necessary triggers for us to see this outcome starting to unfold?
The key trigger would be the launch of truly capable, new, OS-level agent frameworks by Apple or Google. Not just incremental improvements to Siri or Google Assistant, but something fundamentally more powerful and integrated. Also, watch for native shopping or payments integrations happening directly at the OS level. Imagine if Apple Pay started to seamlessly integrate with a proprietary Apple system agent to handle complex booking tasks or product purchases without ever needing the user to open a third-party app. If the OS itself can handle the core utility and autonomy functions, the need for an external AML, everything app diminishes significantly. The control snaps back firmly to the hardware and OS layer.
Okay, this has been incredibly detailed. Let's try to pull all this analysis together now into a kind of final strategic checklist. Based on everything we've discussed from the source material, what are the absolute must-do items? Let's say the three most critical things each of these competitors needs to achieve in the near term to really validate their chosen path towards winning this everything app race.
Yeah, I think we can definitely synthesize that. We can basically turn their core vulnerabilities and strategic goals into a clear must-do list, a roadmap for what success looks like for each of them.
Great. Let's start with OpenAI's checklist. Their focus seems to be all about maturing the platform and, crucially, getting those transactions flowing.
Okay, for OpenAI, number one, transact, not just answer. This is paramount. They absolutely must close the loop that goes from a user expressing intent I need new running shoes, to actually completing a secure purchase or booking within the ChatGPT experience. They need deep integrations for commerce, travel bookings, maybe even subscriptions directly in the chat flow. They have to solve that payment maturity challenge, whether it's through a very deep partnership, maybe an acquisition, or finding some other clever way to make it seamless.
Okay, transact.
Yeah.
Number 2 for OpenAI seems related to that trust factor, especially given the power of their generative models, like Sora.
Yes, number 2, govern like an app store. As their ecosystem grows, they need robust governance. This means seriously vetting those third-party apps for safety, security, and privacy. It means carefully managing integrations with payment providers. And it means being aggressive and transparent about regulating AI-generated media, things like implementing reliable watermarking and having clear policies on misuse. This is all about maintaining the integrity and trustworthiness of the platform itself, treating it like a true operating system.
And the third point for OpenAI seems to circle back to those hardware ambitions
Yeah.
and making the assistant truly ubiquitous.
Exactly. Number 3, expand presence. They need to escape the browser tab and the mobile app. This means securing major hardware partnerships, maybe with car manufacturers or smart home device makers, OEMs, or potentially even launching their own hardware. The goal is achieving that ambient voice interaction and low latency cross-device presence. The OS needs to feel like it's everywhere, always available, not just another application you have to consciously open.
Okay, that's OpenAI's list, transact, govern, expand presence. Now let's do the same for the X and X AI combo. Their checklist seems much more focused on getting the fundamentals right, regulatory execution, and achieving structural stability.
Right. For XAI, number 1, and this is arguably the most critical, ship payments at scale and reliably. All those licenses they're collecting are useless until they translate into a smooth, reliable, widely available P2P and merchant payment system. They need robust, transparent fraud controls. If X Money doesn't launch smoothly, gain user trust, and achieve broad adoption, their whole super app vision basically stalls right there. They just end up being a social network with a very expensive and complicated regulatory headache.
Yeah, that feels absolutely make or break. Okay, number 2 for XAI. This seems to address their biggest long-term liability, the perceived instability or inconsistency of the underlying X platform itself.
Exactly. So number 2, stabilize brand safety and policy. They simply have to reduce the frequency and severity of those content shocks and policy whiplash moments that spook advertisers and potentially payment processors. They need to demonstrate sustained commitment to consistent moderation and policy enforcement to rebuild and maintain confidence, addressing those concerns we heard from sources like people.com and Swipesum. In the world of finance and commerce, stability equals trust, and trust equals transactions. Volatility scares money away, period.
Makes sense. And finally, number 3 for XXAI involves leveraging that strategic partnership they secured.
Yes, number 3, leverage Azure. They need to actively use that Azure hosting presence not just as a technical solution, but as a strategic tool to generate meaningful, diversified enterprise revenue. They need to build developer mindshare in corporate settings through Azure. This provides crucial financial stability, helps diversify their revenue away from potentially volatile consumer advertising, and acts as a hedge against some of the risks associated with the consumer-facing social media platform.
Okay, fantastic checklist for both. So when we boil it all down, what's the final bottom line here? What are the 2 core paths these companies are taking?
At the end of the day, this race really boils down to 2 fundamentally distinct paths aiming for roughly the same destination, that ultimate digital control. OpenAI is building an assistant-first platform. Their goal is to become the default interface for reasoning, for tasks, for getting things done digitally. XAI and X, conversely, are building a network-first super app. Their goal is to make commerce, payments, and eventually more complex actions feel completely native to the social and real-time interactions that already happen on their massive network. Ultimately, the winner will likely be the platform that can achieve trusted autonomy first, the ability to reliably and safely act on the user's behalf in meaningful ways.
So the really decisive factors we should all be watching are trusted autonomy, as you said, combined with truly seamless payments and fostering a vibrant app economy around their platform. And all of that needs to be delivered inside a product that people are already opening every single day. The winner here isn't just controlling search or social media or even AI tools. They're potentially controlling the essential transactional layer and the core decision-making engine of your digital life. And, this brings us back to a maybe more philosophical thought, one that kind of frames the sheer scale of this competition we've been discussing. People have talked about an age of abundance for ages, maybe even prophesied thousands of years ago in different ways. Perhaps this everything app, this race we're seeing, is simply the modern technological mechanism that's emerging to try and coordinate that abundance, a way to connect supply and demand, utility and transaction, knowledge and action, with almost frictionless speed and intelligence. So, considering the immense complexity of that task, which path do you think is ultimately better suited to manage it?
Is it the more centralized utility approach, maybe represented by an OS like OpenAI is trying to build? Or is it the more decentralized, real-time network utility approach that a platform like X is aiming for? Which model is better equipped to handle the monumental task of coordinating abundance, if that's indeed what this is about? Something for all of us to mull over until our next deep dive.